Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Producers Guild conversation with the creative team behind Dick Johnson is Dead. We'd like to thank our friends at Netflix for making this event possible. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today. Claudia Puig is the critic for NPR's Film Week and president of the LA Film Critics Association. Welcome, Claudia. Thank you for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for having me. I am so thrilled to be moderating this discussion because I love this film. And with us, we have director Kirsten Johnson, producer and PGA member Marilyn Ness, producer and PGA member Maureen Ryan. Sorry about that, Marilyn and Maureen. It's early. Yeah. This is so not the usual documentary about Alzheimer's disease or about losing a parent. It's one of the most original, intriguing, clever, and inventive films I've seen all year, frankly. And I see a lot of movies. It's a brilliant cinematic exploration. In a sense, it kind of demystifies death by acting it out. And it's moving, it's clear-eyed, it's warm-hearted, it's funny in the way that life is funny. So thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to start off with Kirsten. And first off, how is your dad doing right now?
My dad is alive and kicking, and he is now in a dementia care facility, but he is enjoying himself, I have to say, because I think that's sort of his MO in life. For my brother and I, it's been a little harder, but he is with us in spirit and in image.
Love that image. I have to ask what he thinks of the film.
He thinks plural is the operative word. He's seen this film from when it was an idea into the many iterations of it. He's watched the cut hundreds of times. He's watched it dozens of times now in the dementia care facility, and that's how people there are getting to know him. So it's an ongoing process for him, and he loves it.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, go on.
Claudia, I just wanted to say, one of the things that you said that was so generous, and thank you so much for doing this with us, is that, we're looking at the things that are hard to see, but there's a way in which this film makes it possible to look. And one of the key parts of that for me in this was the relationship with not only Marilyn and Maureen, but also Katie Chevigny, who is also a producer on this project. And I really want this conversation to look strongly at our process, because I believe that it's the years that we've all had in the game and our desire to collaborate together in the process of making a really unusual film that is the heart of this conversation for me.
Absolutely. And let's talk about that. Obviously, there's a very personal element for you. Couldn't be more personal, but I wanted to ask Marilyn and Maureen also, was there a personal element that inspired you, or what was your way into this project? And let's start with Marilyn.
Yeah, I have the pleasure of having collaborated with Kirsten on Camera Person. And so we were sort of just coming off of that ride when Kirsten had this idea for this film. And it was incredibly intriguing. I wasn't sure what it was or what it would be, but I had a sense that I wanted to be on that bus. And then I don't have the same kind of relationship with my parents that KJ has with her dad. And so for me to be more than voyeuristic, to be in the room with those guys and in conversation felt like a treat, to watch a parent-child relationship that was so beautiful and so unique. So that was where I felt my connection.
And Maureen, how about you?
For me, I think one of the things that intrigued me was when we had our initial discussion, the idea that kind of comes from one of my favorite films, which is Harold and Maude, which is this idea of doing fake deaths as a way of kind of inuring oneself to one's eventual passing. And that really captivated my imagination. And I've done a lot of recreations on other documentaries. And so this to me felt like we were kind of taking that and moving it down the field in a very interesting way, as a way of creating this balance between, kind of cinema verite and what we end up calling fictional scenes throughout the process. So that really captivated my imagination.
And I wanted to ask you more about the blending of the fiction with fact, because some of the most wonderful and inventive scenes are the vision of heaven that you come up with. And I'd like to ask all of you how that came about. So we'll start with Kirsten.
Yeah, I mean, Claudia, I'm really into pushing the language that we use in general, sort of as humans, but also as filmmakers. And Marilyn and Maureen are into pushing our film community. You know, they've been involved in this set of guidelines of how do we acknowledge all the people in the process? How do we value the producing partners in the process? And so for me, I was like, it's not just documentary and fiction, it's life or death. It's like the evidence that we have and the unimaginable evidence of, you know, what's beyond death. So I was talking in these like big terms like present and future. And it was up to, you know, this incredible team in a way to help me ground down into the reality, like, okay, so what are you filming in the present? And what will we be filming in the future?
So to really bring it to a realistic point. So how did the whole, like when you were filming the heaven scenes and you have the, you know, famous dead celebrities and all of that, the production design was amazing. How did you put that together? I'll start with Maureen.
Well, it was a very iterative process, and it was a way of kind of editing together what we had and then figuring out what we needed next. Originally, the only two things that we ended up shooting that were the original kind of ideas was the funeral. That was the first thing we shot. Well, there was a lot of cinema verite before that, but then in terms of fictional, this multicam live event that was done with Dr. Johnson's actual community and church in Seattle. And then we did the stunts. And then after that, things kind of changed with Dr. Johnson and his dementia. And so we needed to change as a team in terms of figuring that out. And I think Marilyn can talk about that process a lot more.
Yeah, so Kirsten's initial idea was that she would kill her dad again and again. Every time I say that sentence, it's ridiculous.
And bring him back to life.
But we weren't bringing him back to life at first. He was just coming back to life in the verite footage. And so at some point, I think Kirsten and I were in a conversation where I was sort of like, what more could we do for him in this? As we were, you know, as his dementia was increasing and the ability for him to participate in stunts became less and less practical and safe. And so, you know, KJ, I really think of heaven as like we've opened the door into KJ's brain, like who all the people were at the table, the drapes they were wearing were fabrics Kirsten had brought back from where? Where'd you bring them back from?
Everywhere around the world.
Everywhere. The rug in the room was her father's. Furniture came in, but then, you know, one of the things we talked about was if you could give your dad a gift, and he said he used to play the clarinet, but he hasn't in years and years. And she brought his clarinet and he put it together. And there he is in heaven playing the clarinet to this amazing dance number with a man wearing a mask of him. And so I just, you know, the idea that we could give back to DJ, as we call him, felt like a gift. That gift felt like something possible through the cinema process.
And they kept doing this thing that producers always do, is ask you why are you doing that? I mean, the number of times that these two said, why are you killing him again? And, you know, and part of my answer was, I don't know. You know, I'm making this whole project out of need. I don't fully understand what I'm doing. And then another part of it was, honestly, you know, this man was a brilliant psychiatrist, and we throughout my life had these really complex and interesting conversations about psychology. And you know, so this idea, Freud's idea of the uncanny, we thought a lot about how can these objects from his life, like his Eames chair, like our family's carpet, you know, how can they move and shift in this film in the same way that his life has gone from being this really full thing where he has complete agency to suddenly he's living in a bedroom apartment in Manhattan with his daughter and his grandchildren, and his agency is completely shifted. And so sort of how do we convey that visually to the audience was always in our minds of this is this transition that's ahead of us. We're behind it. We're trying to catch up to it. And so that was really fun because it felt like the fragmenting of my father's life and of his mind, we could build back together in the film. And we had all of these elements. And how could that keep the life alive?
I love that. I want to ask you more about his past and but a quick thought I had when talking about the funeral was, did you run into any pushback or any people that just didn't? I remember his good friend found it difficult. So,
well, his good friend Ray was incredibly proud that he went there emotionally. Ray was at the Sundance premiere with us, and he was like, I made this film. If I hadn't have gone there, this film would have been nothing. But, Ray was in on the joke, but I would say my brother was one of the people who had the strongest pushback in the beginning.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How did you convince him? Or how did you?
Well, I didn't. I mean, that was one of the intentions of this project. And I would say, we didn't know what was going to happen, but we did know several things as a team we wanted to do, which was respect all the team members, respect the crew, respect my father, respect the complexity of life, and respect the sophistication of the audience. The audience knows what life and death is. The audience knows what it is to lose someone they love or to be afraid of it, right? So in this idea of respect, when my brother was like, I think he was like, haha, this idea is funny. But then when I really reached out to the pastor and the pastor said yes, and I started contacting all my dad's best friends, my brother was like, is anybody really going to come to this? And I was like, yeah, I think 150 people are coming. And he was like, okay, tell me how you're going to do this. And I said, Dad's going to be up front in an open casket. And his almost immediate words were like, over my dead body. And
no pun intended there.
No pun intended. I'll give you a heart attack, serious, right? And I think that's what's so interesting about film in general is agency, right? How do we have permission from people? My father's my father, but he's also my brother's father. I can't just say ooh, I'm taking him. He's mine. I can do what I want with him, right? And so then to be respectful of my brother ended up giving us this remarkable creative solution that I think makes the scene work much better and was a more powerful experience for everyone involved because my father wasn't there when they arrived. So it felt like his real funeral. He was up in the balcony listening on headphones. So that's what producers know, is that the constraints is where the creativity must emerge. And so they really supported me in my, no, we've got this all set up and my brother doesn't want to do it. What are we going to do? That's where they stepped in so strongly.
Well, Maureen, especially, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that was really one of those moments where I think Kirsten was just like, oh, we've been blocked. But the answer was no. I mean, as producers, we know to use those kind of filmic elements. And so we were able to, the day before, shoot with Dr. Johnson in the coffin, do a wide shot, shoot a plate, make sure we have all the footage, and then have that for later on when it was cut together so we could actually place the coffin there, even though it wasn't there when we actually did the real funeral on day 2. So that was one of those great things that I think, all of us embraced. And I think Kirsten from the outset in terms of her wanting to, talk to stunt people and talk to stunt coordinators and really get into their mindset of what they do and how they do it. That was a theme throughout this whole film, besides just the issues between Dr. Johnson and Kirsten and life and death and all of those things.
I love how layered that is, because you're in a sense paying tribute to the stunt people and you're talking about your father-daughter relationship. It's also a commentary on how we Americans deal with death, because, we don't want to talk about it. And we, let alone lean into it. I think we as a culture are sort of averse to it. And this is a testament to the power of talking candidly about death and with open eyes and open hearts and demystifying it in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's so right on from my point of view. And I think we were interested in demystifying the filmmaking process and sort of playing and pushing the filmmaking process. And I think, this country is built on denial. Our history of violence towards the Native American people, towards the African Americans who are forcibly brought here. We're intimately engaged with the depiction of violence throughout our history of cinema, and yet we're totally in denial about what really happened. And I think that dissonance is something that, we as filmmakers have been trying to think about. How do we pull it apart and put it back together differently? I think we're all thinking about that at this moment in history. And so for us, I think on the one hand, it's like easy to say like, okay, we're going to face death. But what I found throughout the process was just like layers of my own denial, which is always what I'm interested in, is sort of the blind spots that just keep revealing themselves. So like you can say, like how much America is in denial, but I just feel like, that's constantly being re-exposed to us. So, I really knew I had to work with people I trusted deeply to see my own blind spots and my own levels of denial. But, after we finished the funeral, I literally woke up that next morning, and we'd celebrated, like it had gone so well. The multicam shoot was fantastic. And I woke up so depressed, and I was like, what is wrong with me? And I was like, oh, I guess I really thought if we really did the funeral, Dad wouldn't have to die. And so I was like
Yeah.
truly in denial to myself.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
this isn't gonna do it, actually. I believed a little too much in the power of cinema.
All your years there.
Yeah.
Well, in
Yeah.
a sense, you think about, delivering elegies before somebody dies. And that's when, we all kind of would like to be able to peek into our funerals and hear what people had to say and how people were reacting and all of that. So, and why we wait until someone is dead to extol their virtues and sing their praises is kind of a strange thing. So did your dad feel like, I'm glad to hear this from people, or?
Oh, he was hilarious. First of all, he was like, there aren't that many people here. He's like, much ado about nothing. So I think he was hoping for a bigger crowd, but the fact is he's 87 and a lot of his friends have already died. Right? I mean, and I think that's part of aging too, right? It's like you entered the valley of death. It is no joke out there, as Ray Damaso knows and knew at the end of the film. But absolutely, he loved it. He joked about it. He was happy to hear that people cared about him. But one thing that was really true for me too was I had gone through my mother's funeral. I would have loved for her to have heard everything that everyone would say. But I also just really wanted her to hug me at the end of it, and she wasn't there. So part of this was just really me being like, I'm doing this funeral so that he'll be alive at the end. And so that it was like that push and pull between whose needs are we meeting here and addressing here. So I do think it's as much for the people who are left behind as it is for the people who, wish to hear the good stuff people are going to say about them.
That's true. So Maureen and Marilyn, were there any places where it was really challenging on an emotional level to make this? I know this wasn't your father, but we've all experienced loss and we all have parents. So I'm sure there were some real emotional moments for you. Marilyn.
Yeah, I mean, we lost amongst us several parents in the making of this film. So there was deep emotion in some ways for each of us at different times. But I think emotionally, it's a scene that's not in the film, but when we were filming Heaven and Hell, at some point, Kirsten, her father needed to sort of be there alone. She said, he's going to go I can only bring him so far, and the rest of the journey he will have to do on his own. And I think she was overcome in that moment with the realization in real time as we sat there that her father was at some point going to be gone from this world, and she wouldn't be able to stop that or be with him. And I found that really powerful and emotional. I think for me, even though I knew all along how uniquely close they were, it was very moving to watch a daughter confront that, and not at the moment of death, right? Because I think for me, when my mother died, it was at that moment when you get that phone call and that's it, she's gone. But Kirsten felt that with her father still there and could still get a hug. And I think that for me was a very emotional, very powerful moment. And we were also at the very end of that shoot. So we also pulled it off at that moment, so the relief that we feel. So all of that was commingled, I think, for me.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think for me, it's the ambulance scene. You know, people don't talk about that one quite so much because it doesn't have as much. But pulling that off was quite a challenge because I went into it from a producing point of view. It's just like this has to feel super real. Like it has to be as real as possible. So we've got real EMTs, real ambulance. We're driving around the block with a real body on a gurney, you know, and working out. So that there was this kind of split screen for me, which is just like working out all the technical stuff and really making sure that it read, you know, hyper realistic and that it was going to be believable. And where do we drop the phone? And is that the right place? But, you know, all of that, and then going around the block and coming back and resetting and doing that for quite a bit on our shoot day. But then there was the other part of it where you're hearing what's going on as they play out the scene around the block and the anguish of what a daughter feels in that moment, and those kind of spaces of silence when she asks a question, the EMT, like they're busy trying to save his life kind of thing. And like that was pretty intense for all of us. I think it was a very small crew. And so to have that go on really kind of brought it very close to home, I think, for any of us, you know, in terms of what could happen in that moment of a heart attack. So.
It's, as you describe this, both of you, it strikes me how ambitious this documentary is, more so than any documentary that I can imagine recently, and also so emotional. I mean, you rarely get those two together, where you're, you know, that just seems like it's ambitious in every sense. And I wondered, maybe this was one of the easier parts of it, but Kirsten, getting your father is such a good sport, and being a psychiatrist, I'm sure he's, you know, interested in how things work, and he's facing, you know, emotions and all that. But how easy was it to get him to sign off? I know he wanted to spend time with you, but did he ever have any trepidation or any concerns?
You know, absolutely. He didn't have trepidations initially, other than like, why would anyone want to watch a movie about me, make a movie about me? Like that didn't make any sense to him. You know, he's a modest person, right? But he does love to laugh. He thought it would be funny. He thought along the way we could make things funnier. So he was into that. But, you know, I think as the dementia advanced, there's no question that he felt more and more vulnerable as a person. So to be, you know, we have the moment in the film where he's afraid that we're really asking for his blood, which is, you know, which I think is so amazing with how my father's dementia has manifested. But I think it's common for Alzheimer's sufferers or people with dementia that the metaphors become really powerful, right? So like, I don't want to be exposed. You want my blood. You know, like these are expressing this. He'd be like, sometimes you're like, why do you want to kill me again? Like, you know, and this sort of crazy wish fulfillment of like, you know, I'm part of me, the like sort of inexpressible thing is like, yeah, I'm mad at him for getting dementia. Like we've already done this once with my mom. Like I'm mad at him for aging. I'm mad at him that he's going to die soon. And then to act this out in this like crazy sort of game of we're going to kill you and get you back again. But both he and I knowing what dementia does. And at some point I'm not going to be able to get him back again. I think he engaged with that in a really direct way. And then we would both reassure each other. I think we're often found reassuring each other. Like, no, haha, yeah, I can do euthanasia to me. Yeah, let me know first. That kind of thing. I think, you know, we were playing a game with each other that comforted both of us.
In the car, with the car situation, I remember noticing that. That
Yeah.
was one of my favorite scenes where he's like, you know, this reminds you of when your mom did, well, not so bad. And you were like, not so bad.
Yeah,
And
right.
it was so beautiful.
Totally. And I knew, like, you know, he's a child of the Depression. So I was like, I'm going to exaggerate how much it costs to park a car in New York. I'm like, it's $2,000, Dad, to park a car in New York. And he's like, oh, in that case, I don't want the car. Right. So it's like trying to find the way in that finally we can joke about it. Right. There's got to be a way. So I think we kept searching for that together.
But I found it interesting that KJ there was a period of time when the verite was happening, where he was moving out of his house and then moved into her apartment. And then, one day there we are and we're filming him eat his lunch. Like that's, he's eating his tomato soup and his cottage cheese. And I remember you, KJ, insecurity rises in all of us at any point while you're making a film, but you were like, who is going to care about this? Why does anyone want to watch my father eat cottage cheese? And I remember thinking, I only want to watch Dick eat cottage cheese because the way you two interact is so beautiful, but it felt small at the time. And, now I think we know that, inspecificity is the universal, and that's what we're all seeing is what do we do if it were our parents, and we can put ourselves in their shoes with them eating cottage cheese and having to give up their car. So I thought your dad probably brought you back from the brink on those moments too, where he would do something remarkable and you'd be like, okay, maybe it's not that small, or we convinced you too. But there was a back and forth the whole time of, is this a good idea? And who's going to want to watch it?
Maureen, you were nodding on that too.
Yeah, I think also the modulation between the small kind of moments, which actually aren't so small, and then also the bigger stuff, right? The stuff where we get to do a big dance, or we get to create hell and all those kinds of things. And so the editorial on this by editor Nels Bangerter, and working with Kirsten to try to figure that all out. And it was something that I think in retrospect, it can kind of feel inevitable, but man, that was quite a journey for 3 years to get that right, to get that mix between these things that are the fictional and then the cinema verite, to figure out so that there's a journey of poignancy and all of that, but humor and entertainment. There was so much going on, and it wasn't really until quite close to locking picture that I think we all felt that it landed. So yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, sort of hitting that tone, because it is so complex. There are moments that we're laughing, and there are other moments where we're on the verge of tears, and other moments where we're wishing, gee, I wish I had a dad like that, or, oh, look at their wonderful relationship, or, there's so many different emotions. How did you manage that tone? Because I would think that was a tightrope walk.
You're right on, Claudia. Tone was the question from the beginning. It's just like, how are we going to pull this off? How are we going to find this tone? But I think what was exciting about our process was that we knew we wouldn't figure it out immediately. Like that we didn't know what the dementia was where it was going to take us. And in the beginning, I wasn't even copying to the fact that dementia was really there. I was just like, I just know I want this before it's too late. And a dear friend of mine, Carol Dysinger, whose mom had dementia, said to me, with dementia, you always do everything too early or too late. You take away the driver's license too early, or someone gets in a car accident, right? And I think this idea of like too late had already happened to me with my mom. I blew it. I like missed the chance to have, and this is what I think is so interesting and like about cinema in general. I do think that some people have great memories, but even those people, their memory is fragmentary and it shifts over time. And I know that the way my memory functions, the Alzheimer's was so obliterating to my mother that I can barely remember who she was. And so to have this evidence in film of my father, it comforts me, because I do have the fear I won't be able to remember who he was, because that happened to me with my mom. And so, on one level, we all knew, like, worst case scenario, we filmed this and I've just got the evidence. So it was already like doing something for me in the process. And then the next phase of the process was, okay, we're going to get this material, see what it does. And then can we find a way to laugh at it? Can we find a way to be defiant of death? Can we imagine what might shift up the energy and shift up the tone? And so we relied on, the edit room, VFX, the sound mix, and all of these things we did throughout the process. So we tested tone. We did a million different versions of the sound that came out of Ray's horn, because we wanted it to rest right in this crazy space between, this is a little uncomfortable, wait a minute, I can't help but laugh, and so we wanted to be at that edge and that edge between the boundaries between these spaces was part of what we were always trying to see, like, how much does it expand?
That
And
edge is a
also
very, oh, go on.
I would just say also, Kirsten wasn't originally, like, Kirsten's camera person persona, where she's behind the camera, was, I think, when we began, that's how you were going to be in the film. And then
Yes.
it became clear at some point as we tested this material and it came back, we as the audience needed to see Kirsten. We needed to understand what was in her mind, what she was feeling, both to give us permission to feel it, but also to feel whatever we were feeling for ourselves, to feel what she felt, and then to decide what we felt. And that took a while till KJ realized, yes, I need to do VO. Yes, I need to, that is a part of this storytelling. And I think that changed tone a lot. It allowed us to go to much more emotional places, and then you could end with a laugh, or you could do something ridiculous and end with a cry. And that, it turned out, mattered. You needed to kind of bring people, even in one scene, from here to here or here to here. And I think that's part of the ride that people are now experiencing.
That was such a wise choice, because he's so lovable and we're drawn to him, but watching the relationship, that's a separate thing. And that's so wonderful too, because it's just, you know, many people have not been fortunate enough to have a relationship like that with a parent. So.
And it's something that I took for granted. And honestly, it was Marilyn saying to me, you know, not everybody has this, actually. And this film is as much about the relationship between the two of you as it is about him. And I was like, no, it's all about him. But that was my own denial, right? And we worked with a wonderful team at Netflix, and Kate Townsend and Jason, who was there on the project with us. He kept saying, you got to throw yourself under the bus, KJ. You're throwing your dad under the bus all the time, right? And they really pushed me on the voiceover, and we were like, no. And then all of a sudden it was like, yes. But
I wanted to,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go on.
No,
please.
go ahead.
No, I wanted to also ask Maureen and Marilyn about, sort of about being on that nice edge that you talked about, Kirsten, because I would think that's a very difficult place to be. And that is what made this film so great. But, you know, how is that as a producer was it stressful? Was it challenging? Is it wonderful?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it was a process, and it was all hands on deck to try to figure out the kind of what's going to work. But for me, I have a pretty dark, twisted sense of humor. So I always leaned in that way, you know what I mean? And we all kind of had our ways of coming to the material. And I think that over time started to allow us to have some kind of way through. I don't know, Marilyn, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the knife's edge was a little scary because we did convince Netflix to give us some dough to make this movie, and kind of said, well, we don't entirely know how it will work, but it'll be iterative and it'll inform itself, and trust us, we had a long and difficult process finding the voice of camera person, so we'll get there. So that felt knife's edge-ish. When you would do your check-in calls, they were consummate collaborators, so not to leave anyone with that impression, they were very willing to let us take risks. But it was we were building something brand spanking new, it felt like, and there's no roadmap.
But
absolutely.
Claudia, I mean, I think you know this in your work as a journalist, right? There's just like, you're going on, okay, I have an idea about where this might go, but then boom, sort of out of nowhere comes like this gem. And as a documentary camera person, that's what you live for, this moment when something really surprises you. So I think it was very deliberate based on the extensive experience we've all had with, observational documentary. We live in this long middle of filming and filming for years, not knowing where things are going. And that gives us a thrill. We like it. Right? Because it's like, this is the crazy serendipity of life. Maureen and I were just on a call where we learned the term serendipity management. And the person said,
it sounds like an oxymoron.
I know it is, but it's like this process was built so that the unexpected would have space. Yeah. Because that's what death is, that's what dementia is, and no one can control it. And that's what we're talking about. So I would say where I felt like, oh, this is my wheelhouse, I know things will happen, was in the observational documentary part. I will say the change that I made as a filmmaker throughout the process was where I didn't know that was in the fictional part of things, where, I didn't know how the stunts might work out. I didn't know how heaven might work out. But the transition I made, I think when we did the funeral scene, that first day when we were setting up the casket, I was still doing something that I had done years ago working on fiction films, where I pretended to know things. I pretended to know where the camera went. I pretended to know what order we should shoot in. And by the middle of making this film, after we'd done a couple of the stunt shoots and I confronted how Dad's dementia interacted with trying to do a stunt shoot, I was like, you know what? I'm done pretending I know anything about what's going to happen. Can we build a process where the crew's still respected, time is still respected, money is still respected, my dad is still respected, and yet we know as little as possible? And so we developed that as a process. And I give just huge credit to Marilyn and Maureen, because it was an unfamiliar process to them too. And we all, by that point, had developed so much trust together that it really worked. I think we were all just like, we don't know what heaven's going to look like, but we're doing it in 3 days. But we had all of the elements in place for it to function.
And
Yeah, I think that, just to follow up on that, I think that was one of the exciting things for us as producers, is to be able to put together this incredible team of, talented stunt coordinators, actors, and crew, and then let them all understand that this is what we were going for. And so we had everything set. It wasn't like we didn't know what we were planning on doing in any given day, but then within that, we could really kind of expand on it and play on the shoot days. And keeping that tension was one of the more kind of exciting parts of it, I think, for all of us.
And you all are experienced in this realm. Kirsten, you've had, is it true, 30 years as a cinematographer? Is that?
Apparently so, but you could never tell.
I've been a journalist for more than that, so I guess I understand that. But could you have made this film at another point? Obviously, this is the point in his life at his age, but had this been 10 years ago and he had been the age he is now, did it have to, do you think it took these years of experience?
Oh, clearly. Mm-hmm. Clearly, right, Marilyn?
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, making camera person taught us things.
Yeah.
And we wanted, I mean, it became in the edit room too, this like, can the film teach the audience how to watch it, right? And so like these processes where we sort of gave up the illusion of control of anybody, of sort of what someone else is going to feel watching this film. It's like, I can't know, Claudia, how it hit you for like what's going on in your life. I couldn't know that it was going to be the pandemic when this film came out, right? So giving up the control over the things that we have no control over, then became this just like deeply freeing thing. But I was not free when I started making Camera Person as a filmmaker. And lots of people say it's my first film, and I'm like, no, I made this film and this film and this film before. But I think it's the first film in which I owned my voice fully. And, that came in my late 40s, right? And, I'm 55, and I love the way age informs this movie. And I was relying on this one to like inform me more.
But I think also I had worked with Maureen on a previous film on 1971 where I finally had come to the point of not pretending. And I don't do fictional films. I do documentary films. And so realizing we needed a collaborator like Maureen, who, because we had worked together before, even though this sounded like a crazy idea, she understood I had worked with Kirsten before, and we were going to find a way for each side to speak to one another, because they did come from really different places. I thought, I remember saying this to you, Kirsten, how insane is it that the least, Kirsten's very hard to tack down. She's all over the place, and it's a fun ride. But how did that person wind up deciding that they wanted to do a film with stunts, which requires the most precision you could ever have in filmmaking?
Yeah, Marilyn kept being like, why are you doing this?
And I thought, we need Maureen because she's going to tack her down. But then the amazing thing was Maureen also said, okay, we can tack down some of it, but the process here is not tacking down all of it, because then there's no room for magic. And I think it took all of us and our years of experience to know that we could kind of hover on the edge of this, and it won't break. And maybe something new will come of what broke, but we can make something of that.
And I just want to say, like, you know, part of what we all get taught about cinema is that, like, the director is like this, like, wild person who has these crazy ideas, and you have to, like, rein them in, or you have to let them go, and they can, you know, do their bad behavior and all these things. And I feel like those are myths that were protecting some people's bad behavior in the past. And, you know, they're also shortcuts. Like, it's harder and takes more time to allow the imagination to go wild, but also to say, like, how can we all collaborate respectfully? And, you know, I think we're at a moment in history where we're asking cinema to do differently than it has done. But none of us want to lose the, like, wow, like, you know, it's like this escapist, wild, takes us to another world, shows us something we've never seen before. So how do those two pieces fit together? Can we be responsible and respectful and also be, like, mad? And so I was really, I think the transition for me from being a crew member, in which a crew member knows, like, sees a director from a distance and sort of says, wow, they're behaving really irrationally right now, or they're so lost in the world of their own anxiety, they can't see that we've got a film, or they're so turned on by making the film that they don't know we need to eat. But it's the producer who sort of imagines the worst case scenario and, like, keeps everybody on track. I think what I'm interested in what we did together was that we stopped being, like, the good cop, bad cop. We stopped being like, oh, mom's the one who, you know, is the disciplinarian and dad lets us have all the fun. We decided together, we're building a process where we all get to have fun. Nobody gets hurt, right? But I think that was growth for me in particular. But I think it's possible. And I think that's what's exciting about what we've done.
Well, I want to ask all three of you about that, because your film does take us to places that we haven't been. And as a critic, just personally, I'm really excited by that, because so often I go to places that I've been a million times before.
Right,
so
right.
I really want to go to new places, and that's what your film does. So thank you, first of all. I wanted to ask each of you, like, what did you come away? Was there anything that changed you or changed your perception as a result of this, making this film? And I'll start with Maureen, because I can see that Marilyn is pondering.
Yeah. The smoke is coming.
No, I think two things. One is what Kirsten talked about, this expansion of how to collaborate together as a director and a producer, and to basically just create, kind of just allow as much room for play as possible, but knowing where that fine line is as a producer to keep everything on track, and to also cast the crew so well that you know you're all got each other's back, and that's going to really lead to exciting work. So that was really great to kind of play that out in real time in the way that we made this film. And then I think the other thing too is just, you know, I actually had never been around anybody who had dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And so to spend time with Dr. Johnson and to see that over the course of 3.5 years, you know, always, as I think anybody who has had that in their own lives or their family, gives you a sense of, like, you know, time's ticking away. And so that has been a real gift. And now with the pandemic, there's kind of like a different gift in some ways, I think, that comes from that ability. Kirsten and I were talking the other day of being kind of in one place. You're kind of grounded. We're not all on planes going all over the place all the time. And that too. So I think those are things that I've taken away from this whole process that I'll take into, you know, kind of the rest of my life, career and life.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Marilyn?
So I more often wear a producing hat, but I occasionally wear a directing hat. And I think the way in which this film embraced the unknown, and also that the process could be part of the filmmaking, I'll definitely take with me. There's another project I'm starting work on, and it's I don't have most of the answers, but I understand that there's a way that the making of it needs to interact with the material, and it'll be radically different. Kirsten has been on board as I've been thinking it through, but there's a framework, there's a new process one can imagine in creating art and film. And I think that's really interesting to me, because like you, I've made many documentary films, and sometimes can feel a little rinse, wash, repeat. And so here we have a new process and a new way to think about the work we're making that feels really energizing for the next phase of whatever I make. So thanks, KJ. Thanks, Maureen.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, Claudia, one of the things I feel like, every human has moments of feeling unseen and wishing people were understanding what we were going through. And, there is some part of me that's like, if I do get dementia, it's going to be really interesting to know what that felt like from the inside, right? But what I do know is what it's like to be a caregiver. And you think about this moment of the pandemic and the unseen work that caregivers are doing, the unseen work that the healthcare folks are doing on all of our behalf. And, this sort of trauma at scale was something I thought a lot about during Camera Person. So it's just teachers, doctors, social workers, journalists, right? Experience trauma at scale. And among the unseen people that I discovered in the cinema industry working on Camera Person was look at all these journalists who spend hours and hours having these conversations with me. Look at all these publicists who put tons of energy into, setting these things up so that the word gets out. And so part of our process, Claudia, was every person we were involved in, we went back towards them as opposed to you just asked me the question. So Claudia, one of the things that we did in the process was I asked everyone, Claudia, have you ever thought about how you wish to die?
Ooh, I have thought about it. Both my parents have passed away, and they would be 100 and 101, I think now. So,
and you're counting. You know how old they would be.
I know how old they would be. Yes. And they had very different deaths. One died in a car accident very suddenly. It was shocking to me. And the other one had a slow, she had cancer. And each of them in a way died, this is going to sound strange, but in a way that they would have preferred. One was at home surrounded by family. When it happened very suddenly, didn't have to suffer because he would have been a terrible patient. So I've thought about this a lot. I've thought a lot about death. And because I, as a mom like you, you have children and you think about your own death, because I'm in my 60s and I'm thinking about that. Not that I'm hoping that I hope it will be far off. Right. So, yeah, my husband and I have a joke that we want to go to Oregon, or I guess California is now doing it too. Where, if we're, have a long illness, we probably don't want to bog everybody down with it. So yeah, I'm Latina, so we have a different attitude about death. We have Day of the Dead. We celebrate death in a different way. So, yeah, I have thought about it.
Yeah. And so part of your thinking is, I wish to have some agency in it.
I definitely wish to have some agency. Yes. I had an aunt who had Alzheimer's for 13 years. Yes, it was brutal. Yeah, it was a very long process.
And who took care of her?
Her husband, and she never forgot who he was. She forgot her children and a lot of other people, and it was very difficult. And ultimately, he always thought about whether or not he would have her go to an institution, but he was able to bring people in to take care of her. She was very lucky in that respect.
It's pretty amazing that both of your parents died in the way that they would have wished. It sounds like genetically you're predisposed to die the way you want to.
With a newspaper in my hand, in my bed.
I wish that you may live a very long time and that it will be easy for your children. But, I also think that thing of of course it's not going to be easy on your children, Right. I mean, I think that's the thing that I'm
It's
learning.
funny, my daughter and I actually talk about, like, she talks about how she'll eulogize me because I was a family eulogizer because I'm a writer. So I not only eulogize my parents, but my aunts and my uncles, and people always call on me to write eulogies. So it's a strange little side thing.
So now she's thinking about it. So she's thinking about it. And
she's thinking about it because she's a good writer, and she,
Oh,
yeah. And I'm
wow.
like, I don't want to hear about my eulogy, but yeah.
But she wants to practice a little bit.
Yes.
To see if she can measure up.
Yes, she said, I want to focus on your sense of humor as opposed to like other things, you know, like
tell her,
weird,
like,
dark
right
sense
on,
of humor.
right on. We're so with her.
Well, nobody wants to hear more about me, though. I want to congratulate you guys, and I know that you have just been nominated for Critics' Choice Awards, which is fantastic, and I know there'll be many more awards in your future.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Well, we specialize in the unexpected, so we know nothing, but we are delighted for all good things that come our way, especially in these times.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I know your film speaks to so many people because we all face death in one way or another. We all face, aging, our parents, people around us. So it is, universal, and it makes us, I love that you said we watch it and you kind of show us how to watch it, because I do think that's very true. We don't, we're figuring it out as we go along, which is brilliant. So thank you so much. Marilyn, Maureen, and Kirsten, thank you for your great
Claudia.
film.
Claudia, it's been wonderful.
Thank
and
you.
Long may we all live, even though we know we're all going to die.
That's a great note right there to end it on.
All right.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.